Good morning and welcome to the Global Voices series. We're streaming live from the World Bank Spring Meetings here in Washington, D.C. I'm Sophie Edwards, a senior reporter with DevEx, and I'm joined here by Philippe Le Houérou, the head of the IFC. So let's talk about impact investing, which is something that the IFC has been doing a lot of work on, I understand.
Well, good morning, Sophie, and yes, we're very proud of the work we have done. This has been 1 year and a half into the making. The idea about the impact investing is the same idea that came out in Addis Ababa in 2015. How do you go for development from the billions that we see in ODA to the trillions? The only way to do that is to crowd in private finance, to start investing in emerging markets and, even more difficult, in the poorest countries. So that's the context, but it's important. The second is a tradition in IFC that we do our own investment and try to catalyze project by project. But we are also we have a tradition for example, 20 years ago, we did what we call the Equator Principles, which is to bring all the banks that were doing project finance and to say, okay, how we do things. And that was very much on the environment and social standards in project finance. But it was very much like do no harm, which was a big step forward. And now, it's almost an industry default, which was a big step forward. People forget history. Then on the green bond, when it started, remember the green bond market was zero in 2007. That's yesterday. Then it started with public institutions like World Bank, IFC, EIB. But then it was not taking a lot of traction. So we came together and decided on the principle on green bond. Because if you're an investor and you buy a green bond, you want to make sure first you have the return, but also it's green. And there is a mechanism to ensure that it's green and it's not greenwashing.
Yeah.
And that alone, so we did that and it was published in 2014. And between 2013 and last year, the market went from 10 billion to 180 billion. Because people need to know what they're buying when you're an investor. So now we're seeing there's a lot of new impact funds that are coming up. Why? Because finance companies are doing their work and they know that, they see that there is a new generation coming at the helm. The post-baby boomer, if you want, Generation X, millennials, that want the cake and eat it too, which, like me, which means they want the returns, but they want also to feel that the money is used for good. But that's very generic. So the point, and what we're witnessing is, maybe we should do the same that we did in the Equator Principle for project finance, for the principles for the green bond market, for the impact investing. So what does it mean, impact? And impact can mean many things to many different people. So instead of trying to define its health or its environment, impact can be many things. We said, okay, let's have principles to make sure that we all abide by certain rule of the game. And that's, we believe, can be potentially very structuring for this new emerging market of impact investing. So that's the genesis, but it's very important to have this sense of history. And the good news is tomorrow we'll have the founding fathers, if you want, or mothers of impact investing. We will have a lot of signatories already that will sign on these principles. And we hope that will be the beginning of a movement. But that's the first rotation of the snowball.
Okay.
So that the industry, and it's a self-regulated industry. It's not, there's no someone that's defined supranational that define what is impact investing. So that's why we did two things. We did both a lot of work because there's very little information on what is impact and we have been struggling with a lot of numbers. So the report is very number intensive. But then also what are the principles? It's mostly about process. What is your intent? Then when you have the intent, clearly what is your investment strategy to deliver on the intent? What are the processes that ensure that the strategy is implemented.
Yeah.
How you measure it, because without measurements, it's very hard to say anything, and how transparent, what is the disclosure of your measurement and the audit,
Yeah.
because otherwise, then it can be just trust me. So it's a bit, and a lot of people spend a lot of time thinking before signing on the
Yeah.
principle, and it took us 1.5 years of consultation with the industry, obviously, the impact investors, because there are
Yeah.
academics, CSOs, think tanks. So we did a lot of kind of consultation. We didn't want to come and ex nihilo and
Yeah.
say this is it. So I think it's a very good, practical, pragmatic way to add a little stone to this billion to trillion agenda.
Okay. I think one question is, why is the IFC leading this effort and not perhaps the OECD, which has done a lot of work on blended finance, for example?
Well, for a simple reason, that we are in the market. We are, if you think about it, we were created in 1956, but we were the mother of all impact investors. By definition, look at our article of agreement, it's in Article 1. We are there for impact with returns. That's the fundamental founding act of IFC.
Okay.
Why? Because the thesis is, if private sector is important for job, it's critical. I think that's, there's no development without a thriving private sector. That's okay. So you need both the returns, because otherwise there's no private sector. If you don't make a profit, you bankrupt. If you bankrupt, you have no impact, by definition, because you don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So how you blend the two has been the struggle of IFC since 1956. So that gives us, and we're unique there.
Yeah.
And we have always, as I said in my previous response, we have thought about that, about the standards. What are the standards? What are the standards? How do we regulate new markets, the green bond markets? I mean, there was nothing.
Yeah.
And anybody can say it's green. Yeah, but what do you mean by green? Now, we are principal and they can report. And it's the same idea. And so we have a tradition. It's in our mandate since 1956, 62 years. And at the same time, we have done it. So we have delivered on the mandate.
So you're at the coalface of trying to do impact investing. But obviously it's difficult, and you've got this mandate to move more into even more difficult high-risk environments as part of the capital increase package. And then there's also sort of data coming out showing that disbursements from the private sector window are quite low, not really meeting expectations. Talk to us a little bit about that. Okay, well, that would be interesting to hear.
Well, you have many questions in one. Let's try to kind of unbundle. First, maybe as a transition, I think there's an issue because you have to have the finance, but in front of the finance, you have to have projects to finance, and projects that are bankable, which means that they're self-sustaining financially. And sometimes you need the bridge if you want to crowd in. So that's why we shifted our strategy and the way we operate, because we told our board, which is I'm responsible to our board, to shift towards more in IDA country, which in World Bank term means the poorest countries, including fragile states, which is even tougher.
Yeah.
What we have seen over and over again is there's no private investor, very little private investment or private investor going there. And in fact, we ramped up, but now we have been stagnating. And it's both a financial issue, capital, but it's also the number of bankable projects. So the big change in IFC that I pushed since I joined is, okay, why don't we create market? Why don't we create our own opportunity? And then go proactively and crowd in the private sector, which means working upstream. Not waiting for an investor that comes and say, oh, can you finance that? And then we say yes or no, and the conditions. That we have done for 60 years, and it works. But not to the level when you can move the needle. So we need to start generating private projects, bankable projects. Bankable means sound project financially, sound project for impact, and sound project on the standards for environment, governance, and social. It's not that easy. That's why there are not that many. And that's the other side of the coin of the impact investing, because we can crowd in the money, but then they say, okay, where are the returns? So we can see on IFC, we have had good returns, so it is possible. But how do you step up? You need to work on both sides of the equation, and the IFC strategy is to push, to go upstream. And we discussed, I think, in Bali, the example of scaling solar, which is a very good example. We can, from scratch, design a project, which means working with the government upstream, and then de-risk the project, where the PSW comes in, and then attract investors that will never have come to that particular country. And because it's de-risked, have a very good price of electricity, and that's based on solar, clean energy.
Okay.
It will not have been possible if we just had waited. These investors that won the bids will never have set foot in the country I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean. And we're doing it now more and more in different markets, not only in solar, but in mortgage, affordable housing. We want to do more in agribusiness. So things that are scalable, where we can bring proactively the investor that will not otherwise have come. That's critical, and it's not easy.
No. And so what do you say to the sort of commentators who are saying that the private sector window, for example, it doesn't seem to be working that effectively?
Well, private sector window started only, a year and a half ago, and we had to rethink the way we are hardwiring, and we assess our risk. So, and we wanted to make sure that the use of the private sector window, because the private sector window, it's an implicit subsidy, it's a guarantee. It enables a number of things, it's complicated. First, I discovered when I came to IFC that I can get rid of the foreign exchange risk in middle income countries. Why? Because there's enough of a capital market so we can organize swaps. But if you're an investor and your revenue are in local currency, but your lending is in dollars, if you have a devaluation in dollars, it's very hard to repay. So we need local currency solutions. But in some market, I cannot do swap. And in the poorest country, there's typically no capital market. So one of the window of the private sector window is to organize artificial or synthetic swaps with IDA. So IDA takes the other side of the swaps, and we pay them. We pay IDA. So that's a way to solve a market imperfection, that there is no capital market, so we can have the tool. And paradoxically, is in the poorest country that you can not de-risk because of the lack of instruments. So that's one thing. Another thing is, how do you give a guarantee to reduce the risk to attract the private sector? Because private sector will come only if there's a risk return that makes sense, or the risk is affordable. So you have two ways to play. You can decrease the returns, but then the private sector will not come, because if you have no profit, you're bankrupt. Or you reduce the risk. And there's a gap between the perception that, some African countries, it's impossible to work, and the reality. So we kind of put a tranche there of guarantee. So we put ourselves in the middle, and we use a private sector window to do that.
Okay.
Because it is indeed much more risky, so you de-risk. But the thesis is attracting private investment.
But do you anticipate disbursements from PSW will go up?
No, the pipeline is coming.
Okay, so it's coming.
It's huge. We have a huge pipeline, but I killed 2 projects out of 3. I really want the economics to be sound.
Right, yeah.
So for 3 projects that are presented to me to access the private sector, and we have a whole governance. It's very complicated and very tough.
Yeah, let's
In
not
fact,
get into
our
that.
our staff are sometimes think that we are too tight.
Okay.
But this is very important for me because it's credibility.
Yes.
I don't want to have a private sector window for 3 years and then we go to something else.
Yeah.
This has to be, it is strategic. Strategy, you don't change every 2 years or 3 years, because then it's not a strategy, it's a tactic.
Yeah.
So there was a long discussion during the whole IDA replenishment with I don't know how many tens of contributors to IDA, including the client country, ask, not me, ask the governments in Africa if they don't like it.
Yeah.
They love it. In fact, they want more of it.
Uh-huh.
So at one point, we should check with the beneficiaries, and for me, that's the poor in the poorest country.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you have to trust us, and we can be audited all the time on how we have done it. We have a huge, tough governance to make sure that we really use it as little as possible. So just having a big disbursement, this is not a good criteria for me. It's the quality. And the pipeline is coming, but it took time because we are very severe at the entry.
Okay. Well, I think that brings us quite nicely to talk about risk, I suppose. So you're being very careful and strategic, and obviously working in these environments is riskier.
Very risky.
And yesterday, you wrote a piece that was published in DevEx, sort of explaining a little bit of IFC taking a new, more proactive approach towards sort of risk mitigation and its work with the CAO, its ombudsman as well. Could you just tell us a little bit about sort of where that came from, a bit of the background?
Well, that came from since I joined. I mean, I come from the World Bank and I went to EBRD, but it's important because everybody has its own history. And then I went to IFC 3 years ago. And remember what I said, you were there. I said I want to put development at the heart of IFC, but IFC at the heart of development. What does it mean? For every project that we have now, we have an impact measurement, a number, with a methodology that you're welcome to analyze. It's complicated.
AIM.
Yeah. It's complicated, but I'm very pleased to see that a lot of other institutions are coming and asking us how do we do it, etc. So it's that's a success in my books that people try to emulate, but it's tough.
Yeah.
So that is putting development at the heart of IFC. But part of it is, and we talked about putting IFC at the heart of development, that's a crowding in of private money to go to the emerging project. But we need the two.
Yeah.
These are the two legs. Crowding it, and that's one of the little things that we can do is impact investing principles. But there are many other things. We syndicate more. We had the MCPP where we're crowding insurance company. But that's the part of the billions to trillions. But that the other part is how do you increase the number of projects, and how do you increase the number of projects in the tougher, poorest country in the world, which is, there's a reason why there's a fragile states and there's no private sector. So it's much tougher. And typically the governance is weaker. Some of the projects you will have impacts on the environment, which we try to minimize and maximize the impact and minimize because it's all a give and take. I mean, you know, the industrial countries polluted, they cut the forests and they developed, and now they live very well. Now we're asking sometimes some very fragile states with no capacity to abide by standards that are very high. Our philosophy is if you ask everybody to jump to the level of compliance that countries at $40,000 per capita are difficulty to meet, and you ask at the $700 per capita to meet, we'll never get there. What our philosophy, which is, I think, much more positive and constructive, is to say, okay, you are not meeting these standards, but we're not going to say you cannot jump that high, so we're not going to finance your project because a good project will create jobs, etc. But we'll work with you to improve the standards.
Yeah.
But we are the lender, so we're not the company. So we have to be clear who is responsible for what. So we give a lot of advisory, technical assistance, and I want to do even more because when I go to fragile country, we will have more of this kind of holding the hand and improving the standards. But we have to be realistic. You cannot go from nothing to very high standards overnight. So you have to have a sense of history and a sense of time. And yes, there will be accidents along the way. I mean, frankly, the only people that never do anything wrong is the people that sleep a lot. But the truth is exactly that. Now, the point is, I like accountability. I really love accountability. I like to be, I'm the CEO, the accountability starts with me. And I told the board, I mean, you know, I work at your discretion. I told the new president, I work at your discretion. no problem. I'm accountable. But it has to go all the way, and we have to be accountable to our clients, to our stakeholders, to local communities, but in a reasonable way.
Yeah.
And that's the reasonable is where the tension is. So
But what's going to be different?
The change is two things, but they are big. One is the role of the CEO and the reporting line of the CEO. I thought, because I come from the World Bank, that if you want to have an independent CEO, it has to report to the legislative. And the legislative in the World Bank is called our board, representing 189 countries.
But so currently CAO reports to the president. Yeah.
Which I always thought was a CEO that should be independent, reports to the chief of the executive.
Yeah.
I thought it was weird. So we've been working on that, and it took a lot of time because it's one of the ideas 3 years ago. So things,
take time.
So now there is a committee at the board that will look exactly into that. Review whether they should report, but also the functions, not only of the CEO, but what IFC is doing.
Yeah.
And I welcome that. I think it's very important to have external eye, and starting with our board, I'm responsible to them.
Yeah.
And they represent countries, our shareholders. That's my number one. So that is going on, and we hope to have and we have an external, they will hire an external panel, nobody from the bank, nobody from IFC, so it's completely external with different skills, because it's not an easy area. And they'll do their work, and hopefully very quickly, I hope, very quickly, because as you know, Sophie, I'm a man in a hurry. Then we'll have the review, and we will act on it. But meanwhile, as a CEO, I ask myself, okay, what can I do?
Yeah.
That is under my purview, my power. And one thing I notice is that we could do much more. And again, I'm not saying we will be accident-free. That I don't know accident-free. It is not in this world, maybe in another world. But like driving a car, there's accidents. Like health, you can be healthy and you have an accident.
Yeah.
So the problem is if it is a majority or the minority of projects. If all my projects have a problem, then I have a real problem. But sometimes we take one project and we make it like it's the whole portfolio is the same. But that's en passant. The key issue is what can I do? And one thing I noticed that is very practical. And I learned from when I was on the bank side, and I want to now, we started it in IFC, is when we have a complaint, instead of trying to the bureaucratic process of you have to apply and then have everything and a request and then react right away.
Okay.
From the operations, from IFC.
Yeah.
With or without CEO.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Forget the CEO for a minute. It doesn't exist. I think we should be much more proactive.
Okay.
And I told we had a management retreat 2 days ago. I said, for me, there are two key words. One is proactive, find the projects, and working upstream.
Yeah.
And it goes together. And I do that, as we just discussed, to bring investors, create projects, create markets, create more opportunity for private sector development. This is where the jobs are. So that's proactive. But let's be proactive also on the accountability side.
Yeah.
And part of the accountability is that's not all the accountability. I have also accountability on the financial returns. I have accountability on many things. But on the ENS and G, environment, social, and government standards, we can be much more proactive. It doesn't mean that we will agree.
No.
But react. Don't let it slide and wait for the CEO.
Yeah.
So that's what we're changing, and it started already.
Does that mean more staff or more resources?
Yeah, well, that's a discussion with our board. That's our budget. We went through a lot of changes in IFC, where we had the workforce program, so we reduced our staff to be able to build this and location. I want to be outcome, which is in the continent is Africa, the region, Africa, MENA, South Asia. So that's what I want to do, but also on the skill side.
Okay.
And part of the skill is advisory services in environment, social, governance, all this. So yes, there is a staff, but staff is budget. So
wait and see on that then.
I wait and see on the discussion with the board. But they have been very supportive. I mean, our board, at least for the last 3 years that I've been there, they're supporting me. Otherwise, I would not have even started this thing.
Yeah.
Because it's a real change.
Okay.
Be upstream, proactive, and driving a little bit harder. Because the easy way is to wait for good project to come.
Yeah.
And just see what is good, what is not good, and cherry pick.
Yeah.
I can do that. That's the safest.
Right.
And don't go to the fragile states.
Yeah. But
That's very
not
safe,
the,
and nobody will attack
yeah.
me on anything, and my profit will be better, and everything will be much better. I will have no staff, less expenses, less reputation risk, less everything.
Yeah.
But that's not, I think, in my view, our mission. And our mission is much tougher.
Okay.
But when the getting get tough, the tough get going.
Ah, and that is a great place to end then. So when
Thank
the
you,
going
Sophie.
gets tough, the IFC gets going.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Philippe.
Thank you, Sophie.
And thanks for joining us, and tune in for more live interviews throughout the week.